In today's episode, we dive into a thought-provoking discussion with camp pro and consultant Nick Teich about his recent survey of over 30 camp directors. His findings are a candid look at the challenges and triumphs of running a camp in today's ever-changing landscape. Kelly and I were excited to explore the valuable insights shared by our camp colleagues and how we can apply these lessons to our own camp operations. Welcome to the Camp Owners Podcast.
This is the Camp Owners Podcast from Go Camp Pro, exploring best practices and issues that professionals in the private camp industry face every day. You can find our show notes at gocamp.pro/ownerspod.
Celebrating 30 years, CampBrain camp management software not only provides a great tool and caring support for your best ever workdays, but a delightful registration experience for parents. Discover what more than 1,800 camps know and how you can love your software too. Visit campbrain.com/ownerspod.
Activity schedules are the backbone of every camper's experience. If there's a staffing change, it's really hard to find a person that knows your camp and the nuance your schedule takes. Come check out Camptivities to learn more about our scheduling tools designed for camps by camp people. Find out more at camptivities.com. Welcome to the Camp Owners Podcast, a space for camp owners to talk about the unique aspects of camp ownership and get inspired by each other. We're going to sit down with camp industry experts, leaders, and fellow camp owners to hear how the camp dream transpired for them, learn from each other, and discuss some of the biggest issues in the private camp industry. Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Shuna. I am co-owner and executive director of Hidden Pines Ranch Day Camp, located in Stillwater, Minnesota.
And hi, everybody. I'm Howie Grossinger, and I am the co-owner and camp director of Camp Robin Hood, a day camp in the suburbs of Toronto. If you are looking to find and subscribe to the Camp Owners Podcast, you can either find us online at gocamp.pro/ownerspod or by searching for us in your favorite podcast app. Finally, if you're listening to this and think it would be useful for other camp owners or aspiring camp owners in your circle, please feel free to send them a note to listen. Really want to just thank CampBrain and Camptivities for continuing to be our most amazing sponsors of the Camp Owners Podcast. And Kelly, we are back. How are you?
We're back, baby. I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's that time. The calendar has flipped. We are in 2025, and it's hard to believe that the countdown is on for summer 2025. And I'm excited for this topic, and we'll get to our guest and our topic in just a moment. But Kelly, so many camp directors are gearing up for conference season. Are you excited for this period in the calendar?
I love conference season. It's my favorite. Just like a little sponge, Howie. Learn. You know me. Yes, I'm sad I won't see you. We won't be together, the dynamic duo. But yes, I'm super excited. But that just means we'll be taking the best out of all the conferences, and then we can recap and have some great people on here after.
Amazing. I agree. And you're presenting, and best of luck for that. I know those workshop attendees will get an awesome experience with all the great material you have. So best of luck with that. And with that, I think we have an opportunity to introduce a really exciting guest. As mentioned before, with conference season fast approaching and many of us well into our air quotes off-season to-do list, I emphasize air quotes to off-season, we are excited to welcome Nick Teich from Fairwinds Camp Consulting to the Camp Owners Podcast. Nick has been a presenter at many ACA events, and his recent article in Camping Magazine called Camp Director Insights and the Importance of It All made Kelly and I super curious about unpacking his findings and to explore some of the big takeaways from the article. Nick, welcome to the Camp Owners Podcast. Really, really happy to have you. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much, Howie and Kelly, for having me.
I know that you've done a lot of work over the years as not only operating camps, but working with so many camps. And one of the things, for those of you who listen to the show regularly, know that we often ask our guests to share their camp origin story. And as a way of kicking off and for all of us to get to know Nick better, I'm going to ask the same of you, Nick. Maybe share with us how you came to us today through your camp journey, and look forward to hearing all about it.
Okay. So I went to day camp as a young kid in New York, where I grew up. And then I started overnight camp in Maine when I was 10. And I went there for many years, 8 weeks all summer, including CIT. Then I was a counselor, part of camp leadership. And I went on to get a social work degree. And while I was getting my social work degree, I started my own nonprofit overnight camp, which I continued to build while I went to yet more school. I don't know why I did that, but I ended up getting a doctorate. And the more important work was building camp. So it began as a 1 week camp, but over the years, it became a full summer camp after we purchased a property in New Hampshire. And I directed it for almost 15 years. And then more recently stepped down to be involved in the business side of things and to start consulting and coaching with other camp directors from around North America, which is super fun. And I love what I'm doing. I provide executive coaching and consulting to directors of all different kinds of camps. We talk about business, we talk about mental health, we talk about our protocols and procedures and everything in between. And so I just love being in the camp space. And then I went and started another week-long family camp just because I don't know, I was bored or
Overachiever, apparently. Wow. That's quite the resume, Nick. That's awesome. So let's talk about the survey that you did. Talk to us about your motivation for doing it. And have you ever done it before, or this was the first time doing a survey of camp directors?
This was the first time I did it, and I really wanted to find out if what I had experienced as a director, I directed through COVID up until after COVID a little bit, and I wanted to find out, have things changed for other camps as well, not from COVID necessarily, but just through the years. And what has changed and what are the biggest issues facing directors? And so for me, I really wanted to get the qualitative data. I wanted to talk to people and actually hear what they had to say and figure out some highlights and themes that came out of that. And so that's really how that started and then turned into some blog posts and eventually this camping magazine article.
Was the survey like post 2024 season when you reached out to people? Like it's based on the collection of data specifically after this last season, or was it over an extended period of time?
It started post 2023 and kind of continued a bit into the next year. So it's really started post 2023, but not so much has changed in the last year.
No, for sure not. And I think we're still sort of feeling the post-COVID experience, but I think that for many of us, after looking at the article and digging into it myself, we want to explore some of the themes and some of the takeaways, and my hope is that it'll resonate with what a lot of people are feeling, but also because you've been able to talk to so many directors and owners, and correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, this is the breadth of camps you did. You've surveyed all types of directors from all types of camps, correct?
Yes, I did. I spoke to, I don't know exactly how many, but a lot of different directors, tried to make it kind of a diverse group of people. And in addition, did some surveying online from camp websites for specific things, like talking about year-round positions, for example. And I tried to hit all 50 states and, of course, our neighbors to the north, Canada. But I think I maybe had 49 here.
So I thought that we would start. Kelly and I wanted to just dive into some of the bigger themes that were takeaways from your work with camp directors and owners. And I thought we would start off with a part of your findings that talked about the more helping hands, the better. And I thought that maybe you could share just some thoughts about sort of the general feelings of where camp operators are on this topic that allowed you to make sort of this more global conclusion about this statement about more hands, and maybe what specifically you're referring to, and perhaps our listeners could find this super relatable to what their own experience is.
Yes, definitely. I think so. basically, I knew firsthand, and I also sort of corroborated this with other directors, that they need help, right? Camp is different than it was years ago. Many years ago, maybe you had one director, maybe you had 1 or 2 year-round people, depending on the size of your camp. And that was sufficient. There wasn't necessarily a large leadership team during the summer. It was the staff are doing their job, they're looking after the kids. If there are some problems with the kids, they're taken care of by either this frontline staff or maybe it gets elevated to a director. And now it's just the nature of children and childhood and the new generations and the way people have grown up. And we could go down a whole rabbit hole of like, what are the causes, right, of these changes? But what's important is that they're here to stay, at least for the time being. And so, how do camps adjust? And camps don't want to be caught off guard, right? They don't want to be caught sort of being late to the game. So, increasing the number of people that are sort of in that upper management team is really important because kids are coming to camp with more issues than ever. And those could be issues that are happening at home and then get brought to camp. They could be issues that come up at camp. There's just more going on and people are talking about it. And then staff, same thing, right? Staff, it used to be that you just don't talk to your employer, you don't talk to your director unless there's a major issue, and you just kind of soldier on and do your thing. And that's not the environment we're living in anymore. So we need support for staff as well because staff are supporting kids with more needs. Therefore, the directors need to support staff who also have more needs and are there for supporting kids with more needs, right? So it's this sort of domino effect of everybody needs more support. And how do you do that as one director? The answer is you can't. So how do we build these teams and where do we go from here? That was sort of the impetus for that.
I feel that down to the core of my being.
I had a feeling you were going to say that. We talk about this all the time.
Oh my gosh. It's so yes, 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 and yes. And we do talk about that. And I don't want a rabbit hole, but I do a little bit, just like stick our foot in just a titch because we were talking about this at one of our most recent leadership team meetings about and like someone who'd been brought back onto our team and they're here year round now, but they'd been a counselor and a camper here, just came back this past summer to be on our seasonal leadership team and are now like they quit their job as a teacher and are here. But we were saying they're like, has it really gotten that much harder? And we're like, yes, it has gotten harder, but like we couldn't really explain why. So I think like you're speaking to that, and I think it is just society and how kids are growing up. But do you have a couple like quick thoughts about the why before we move on to like what do we do about it? Do you have any theories or so that next time I can say, yeah, here's mine. My friend Nick told me.
I do have some theories. I think what's most important is that we know that kids are talking about issues more, they're more open about it, as are adults, right? So, and they're also because of their access to information, right? I mean, obviously, we've got the internet, we've got phones, we've got all that stuff. They've got access to things that individual kids didn't have access to before in terms of what are different diagnoses. For example, we're seeing a lot more, I certainly am seeing a lot more kids sort of self-diagnose as having this issue or that issue, and then other kids kind of talking about it and saying, you know what, I have that too, or I have a part of that or something. And kids can take that any which way. And so it's kind of figuring out, okay, what is it that camps need to pay attention to? It's not about a diagnosis. It's about how does your behavior or the issues that you're bringing affect your time at camp and how can camps help with that, right? And so if they're being more open about that, then the staff is having to pay attention to that. And whereas you might have had a group of 12 kids at a day camp or a bunk of 8 kids at an overnight camp that you could, most of them were kind of self-sufficient. It's now, well, 4 or 5 of them actually have special things that you need to pay attention to and different needs. And so, wow, does that wear out a camp counselor? And the camp counselors then are looking to the upper management directors to say, I need support from you. And where are the directors getting support? They need it. So that to me is kind of what's going on. I do think the the world wide webs, as the kids call it, have had a big hand in this. But I don't know for sure. I haven't done any research.
Yeah, I think for me, listening to the range of camp people that you surveyed and used as examples in your article suggested to me that there's even just a movement to bumping up middle management, right? Where the so-called unit heads or section heads who had probably a huge portfolio 10 years ago of perhaps contact with parents and perhaps staff management and program development and delivery, we're now kind of paring middle management jobs down because I know I can speak for ourselves at our day camp is that we just felt that our unit heads who were responsible for 12 to 15 staff and 60 to 80 kids needed someone who could support them and that they needed to be more on the ground. So we over the last few years, I would say since our comeback from 2020 and in 2021 have dipped into that. And I found that the more helping hands, the better is just, as you suggest, Nick, the range of daily issues that come up, not always crisis level or terrible, but just the daily management of campers and staff call for more leadership and more what I would call sort of offloading from the director level of management of camp to a capable middle management level of staff. And I was just curious, is that consistent with some of your conversations? Are you seeing like more unit heads and more smaller responsibilities? I mean, some camps would have unit heads taking care of maybe 100 kids and 20 staff, and now they've had to pare it down just because of the volume of, well, I would call it stuff that they have to deal with daily. Are you finding that? Is that part of your experience in the survey?
Yes, it is. And with camps I work with as well, that some camps didn't really have that middle management, and they've now gone to having it because it's so important. And figuring out, okay, who are the point of contact to parents or guardians, right? When it does hit a certain level, and when does this come to a director, and more meetings, more daily meetings, right? Middle management meeting, and then an upper management meeting with the middle management, and right, and trying to make sure that things don't get missed, because another part of what we're going to talk about is the parents and guardians, and their, what they're bringing as well. I think years ago it was, you're serving the campers, the staff are pretty much doing it on their own. If they need us, we're here. And the parents are, no news is good news. And if it's an overnight camp, they'll come on visiting day, and then they'll write a few letters to their kids, and all is well, right? Or they'll see their kids at the end of the day, and they won't really talk too much about what happened that day. Parents are not like that anymore. And so the directors are dealing with 3 different constituencies in my mind: campers, the parents, and the staff. And 2 of those constituencies, or all 3 really, want so much more of the director's attention that you cannot possibly do a great job of that as a single person. So yes, more middle management, more, even doubling up where there are leadership teams that are upper management who are overseeing middle management, who are overseeing the younger staff, like more levels, not necessarily for hierarchy's sake, but for the sake of, let's make sure we're not missing anything.
Celebrating 30 years, CampBrain camp management software not only provides a great tool and caring support for your best ever workdays, but a delightful registration experience for parents. They take pride in building long-lasting relationships through their incredible support and care they show to each client. And don't take our word for it. Cassandra Parker, Director of Campers and Families at KE Camp, shares, We love customer service at Camp Brain because everyone's always happy and helpful. There's never a time that we are waiting for answers. Camp Brain is not only focused on your current needs, but for the next 30 summers and beyond. They're continually refining their solution to deliver exactly what camp owners need now and will next, from SMS texting to integrated payment solutions and more. Discover what more than 1,800 camps know and how you can love your software too. Visit campbrain.com/ownerspod.
Every year, it's the same thing. Lots of hours spent working on the daily schedules, only for there to be mistakes, missed activities, and lots of stress. Why is it so difficult? There's got to be a better way. And there is Camptivities, an activity scheduler made specifically for camps. Group scheduling or camper scheduling, we've got you covered. Different day schedules, no problem. Auto scheduling, elective scheduling, batch scheduling, schedule the way that works for your camp. With over 60 reports, you'll be able to see the data easily. Now's the time to implement a better way to schedule. Go to camptivities.com and set up a time to chat. Make activity scheduling easier, less stressful, and more efficient. We love to show you the next big thing in camp, so don't wait. Start the onboarding process now when you have the time. Let us help you get away from your desk and back out in camp. Visit camptivities.com to set up a time to chat.
Well, it's so funny you should say that. And I know Kelly will probably want to get in on this a little bit, but Kelly and I have had a lot of conversations about what's your most recent organizational chart? Like, what have you done? How much has it changed from like 2015 to 2025? And I find that we're exchanging, revisiting all of that. And I agree, it's not so much about hierarchy, it's just about efficiencies and just being able to manage all the things. Kelly, I when Nick was mentioning this, I couldn't help but think about some of our conversations about rethinking the way that we're delivering this supervision and this support and our overall look of our organization.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest challenges, and yeah, we've talked about this, Howie, is when I'm looking at this, is we need more, but how much it's like a fine balance of feeling like you're adding enough, but you're not adding too much. Because I think as also the business owner, you're thinking, okay, what is like a manageable number of kids and staff? And if I just wanted another counselor, maybe I'd add another counselor to that program, but like really what is like managerial and oversight, but still engaged? And I don't know, but I think it is a tough thing between adding more, but not too many. I don't know. You're always thinking about not like productivity, but like, do they have enough to do? Are they busy? Are they
Totally
just hanging out with this group? I don't know. So I think as like that decision maker and looking at those org charts, and we've talked about that, Howie, is when you're going to add more, and I don't know if camps talk to you about this, Nick, and if you ever have advice for them about how to do that and like steps and progression, but it is enough so that your staff is not feeling as stretched, but not also having too many, because you're hiring for counselors and all these other things. So it's just that placing and that trying to figure out that right number and balance, I think, is the tricky part.
And the financial too, right? This investment, I mean, more people to manage, more investment that affects your bottom line. But where's the fine balance between delivering the customer service you envision, not only to your campers and the parents and the staff, but also, where does this fit in? And I think all of us are looking at those things very carefully. And before we give Nick, I'm just curious about Nick, has some of those conversations come up with the work you do with owners and operators around the balance that Kelly speaks of?
Sure, absolutely. Each individual camp has to figure this out for themselves. And sometimes that means trial and error or trial and success, right? It is okay, in my mind, to change things around every year for a few years until you find your groove in terms of your leadership positions. It's okay, because what you're doing is you're trying to get to the optimal number that is going to work, right? And everybody's financials are different. And we certainly look into that, and we look at how is this affecting your bottom line in both the spending, but certainly the retention rate and the parental satisfaction and the camper satisfaction and the staff retention and the staff satisfaction, right? That's worth a lot. So the more support you can handle, you're right, Kelly, up to a certain point. You don't want people sitting around all day that feel like they're just on retainer or something like that. And there's always stuff to have them go plunge toilets or whatever they're going to do, right? None of us are below that. But it is really important to figure out what works for your camp. Is it having a person who is in charge of the unit heads, who is sort of the social emotional person? Do you have a mental health person on site or on call? Do you have somebody who is just dealing with the scheduling and the time off charts? Is that someone's full-time job?
Mhm.
Is that a leadership position? Is that an office position? These things are very camp specific, but I think directors are getting to the point where even the ones that have really resisted delegating are figuring out, I can't do this without delegating, and what can I let go and who can I trust to take this on? And sometimes that just means thinking about the worst case scenario and, what will happen if this doesn't get done the exact way you do it, and really kind of going down those little scenario roads.
And then there's this layer, Nick. I would imagine, I know I've gone through it with our team here, is trying to really determine what roles should be part of the portfolio of seasonal staff and full-time staff. And I'm sure a lot of us have gone through an exercise. I know I can speak for myself of trying to hone in on the capacity, our own capacity to take on more full-time people, and what's the sweet spot. And I do agree that it's a really interesting exercise to see, can we operate the way we've become accustomed and rely on seasonal staff to deliver this level of organization and staying on top of things, or does that call for adding another full-time person, and can we justify it, through the salary that we must pay, and and also the responsibilities to keep them busy 12 months of the year. Big topics, but I think that your article was very thought-provoking on all of that. So I'm glad we dove into that.
Can we?
So go
Oh,
ahead, Kelly, please.
No, I was just
Nope,
gonna
go ahead.
say, well, Nick mentioned parents. So talking about then that other, what did you call it? The three different contingencies, staff, parents,
Constituents
kids.
to
Yeah.
deal with.
Can we move to talking about like parents and guardians, and kind of in the article you had that management and micromanagement. So do you want to talk a little bit about like the caregiver expectations and how directors, like kind of what your survey told you, or some best advice or practice, or what you're seeing camp directors kind of turn to in that regard?
Yes, absolutely. I think that there's a little bit of giving that has to happen on both sides here. I think the parents and guardians have to give a little in order for their kids to have the best camp experience, and they have to trust, and they've got to shop around for the right camp and find out who they feel like they can trust. And the directors also, some of them have to have a little more empathy, I think, toward the parents and the way that parenting has just been for the past several decades now, which is different than maybe it was when they were kids, depending on the age of the director, right? Or even when they were parenting young kids, that people are no longer used to sending kids away or sending them off to a place even for a day that they don't know exactly what they're doing, and they're used to getting pictures. I have a daughter in daycare, and my older daughter was several years ago, and we get pictures and updates during the day from daycare, which is setting a bad precedent for what day camps and certainly overnight camps have to get into. But it is, uh, I mean, I say I'm not looking at that till later because it's a distraction. But that's coming from a camp director, right? A former camp director. People who there are people who wait for that and go, oh, her pants changed. I wonder what happened. Did she have an accident? Do I have to call? Things like that. And that I think there's a really great opportunity for directors and parents to connect before camp and say, here are the expectations. that you should have of when we communicate to you and for what kinds of things. And we'll always answer your calls and we'll always answer emails within a reasonable amount of time. But you have to give a little bit of trust to us and know that we've been doing this for X amount of years. We have a great reputation and we're paying attention to the kids. And I think the quality camps, right, are doing that, but it's still very, very hard for the parents. And then a lot of times there's frustration on the part of the directors, which is totally warranted sometimes. So it's a little give and take.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that we have found in discussions with camp pros on the podcast and just connecting at conferences is that there's just a general feeling of being more proactive, right? They that the fact that we can't rely on the fact that they're familiar with camp in the way that perhaps our parents were when they just sent us off, that they feed off more information. They want the information and we have to make it available. And I know just personally, just in terms of the clientele or the community that we serve at day camp, is that increasingly we have every year a growing number of what I would call unfamiliars, right? Not only unfamiliar with my camp, but just unfamiliar with camp in general. Often, sending your 4 or 5 year old to day camp, or you're going as a 9 year old to overnight camp because your friend down the street sent their best, their kid and their best friends. They're coming in with a notion of what to expect, and we've got to frame that in the best possible way for what they can expect from us. And I kind of defer to my wife, Sarah, here. She just often talks about explaining in the day camp context, the difference between school and camp, right? You send your kid for 10 months to school, and how do we frame like this is what you're coming into? Camp is sensory overload. It's moving fast. It's period to all these things. And so, Nick, I'm curious, as you surveyed camp directors, are you finding that they're putting in more systems or processes on the onboarding portion of this than ever before? And maybe you have some examples of what they're doing.
Yes, if they're not, they should be. But a lot of people have clearly caught on just because it's necessary, right? So having these sort of, even if it's a Zoom kind of an orientation for new parents, sometimes the returning parents need it as well, right? What is camp? You can opt into coming to this. I'm not going to say everybody who didn't go to camp has to come to this, but we're going to have a Zoom. What is camp? What can we expect? What is it like? These are things that I think should be happening actually in the application process to camp, because there are a lot of assumptions made. Sometimes people think, oh, I saw Salute Your Shorts on TV when I was a kid, and there's not camp directors, there's nothing for them. They're not really doing anything. It's kind of a free for all. Therefore, there's no way I'm going to send my kid there. Or they think that's fine and that's how it is, and there's not really any thought behind it, right? So what are the assumptions coming in? How do we speak to those assumptions and say this is who we are? I think describing your camp in a broad way, not just on your website, but on the application or registration form itself, because people don't necessarily read everything. But if they have to check a box that says I have read and understand what Robin Hood is like or what Hidden Pines Ranch is like, and I'm ready to move forward with the rest of the application, there's a little bit of recourse of, okay, this is kind of what we talked about. And you don't have to have a ton of information in there, but then in other forms, I'm a big proponent of code of conduct forms, because they're not just about bad behaviors. They're also about things like self-harm. I do a lot of mental health work with camps. I do on-call mental health work with camps during the summer when directors need. And a lot of it is about, we didn't know about this coming in, and this is happening now, and what do we do? Right. And so the more questions you can ask via the health form, via other forms, and sort of get people to understand who you are and what can be dealt with at your camp, right, is really important. You have to make sure you're being compliant in the US with ADA and things like that. And you want to get some legal advice on that. But I strongly suggest getting that preparation. And it prepares parents as well. They say, you know what, they really care and they're asking about this. And by the way, this solved a lot of problems because now they know that my kid is on the spectrum and needs this, this, and this, and they know and they put it in place and they're ready to go. And it's so much better than if I had just left that out and they had come to find out just because something maybe negative happened.
I ironically had a Zoom with parents this morning, and I think that's something I have gotten better and better at with time. I'm sure Howie, you and Sari would say the same, but it's like the more failures you have with it, the better you become at being so much more proactive and talking with the parents so that I think for me, it's explaining what our camp really looks like so that they can envision if their kid will be successful at camp, or if when they hear about how big camp is or the number of transition or how independent kids are, that they can be like, oh no, there's not a fence or there's not two different rooms that they're in and one outside playground. I don't know. I think that is something that I've learned and gotten better at, is being so much more proactive about setting the picture of camp and then agreeing with the parents, is this a place where this kid can be successful, or is there a better fit? Is there a better fit for your kid where maybe the small group stays together more and there's less space? But I think there's a kid for every camp, but is your camp the right place for that family or that kid, or even what that family is expecting? So I think it's more work in the initial phases, but I think it's something at least I've gotten better at, about taking the time prior to camp versus being reactive and calling them mid-camp and, okay, now what? How do we figure this out?
Well, I think it also totally speaks to kind of the nature of the survey that Nick was attempting to get at, that there is no off season, that we're constantly addressing these issues. There's a family that registers and applies to your camp in December, and you're talking to them in some cases more than you would probably during the summer, but that effort that we all make. And I guess the bigger question, Nick, is, I think, or the biggest reality is that camps are recognizing that sometimes they just need more people, even at that time of year, to address the needs of families when it's not camp. I mean, we focus a lot about what happens in camp and building systems and enhancing supervision of staff and all that stuff we spoke about, but it's also the efforts we make in February, March can go a long way to the transition into the actual start of camp. I mean, I'm curious as to some of your discussions with camp directors about, in part, what Kelly had said about those conversations and those Zoom calls in the middle of the year, but are you just finding more people are just gravitating towards some of what we've just talked about?
I think some are and some aren't. And it really depends partially on the size of your camp, how long they're coming for, right? Is this even possible? Or maybe if they're coming for a longer time, you spend more time with those people. But I think it's huge. I think it's very important for parents to be able to trust directors. And by the way, if they get a sense that I'm not sure this person's being forthright or not asking enough questions, or their health center protocols aren't what I'm looking for, or they're brushing off this really important question that I have, then the parents should not be sending their kid to that camp, right? So I think that the directors that or staff that are able to talk to the parents and guardians directly, the kids directly, that's the best thing. And short of that, certainly asking a lot of questions on these forums. I help camps kind of come up with what questions based on their camp, right? And then somebody reading those, having a full-time employee do it is great. You could even hire someone hourly who's a member of your summer staff, right? Who could do some stuff in March, April, May, read these forms, read through them and flag things for you and say, you know what? I think we should talk to this kid's parent and the therapist, right? Obviously, you have to get permission, but if you feel like you need that, then you need that in order for the kid to have a successful experience. So I think there are ways to be creative if you don't have enough full-time staff, to have trusted summer staff who have been there a while. Say, just note down your hours, and I want you to, in the evenings or whenever you have time, read through these forms or go over these or make a few calls to these parents, join us on this or that. I think that's great use of seasonal staff. It keeps them engaged as well. But, depending on the size of the camp, I know sometimes it's more realistic.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to also just, I mean, this is a good segue because you kind of dipped into kind of the management of mental health in campers and staff, which interestingly enough, and probably not surprisingly, your survey identified like the three areas or that are most top of mind for camp directors these days. And we've already talked about parental expectations, and it mentions the article that including, being honest with camp families, and we've talked a little bit about that. The other two, and maybe we just want to build on some, one of them was mental health needs of campers and staff. More than ever, we're looking to supporting that in a real, very appropriate and meaningful and empathetic way. And then finally, what is not surprising to our listeners is that staff recruitment, retention, salaries, and the demands we put on staff and sometimes the demands they put on us are probably at an all-time high. Just curious of these topics, mental health and the staff recruitment. I'm curious about some of the things that you may want to share that kind of just think would be helpful to the people listening in today.
I think there's a little bit of fatigue around the term mental health, which I completely understand.
Mhm.
And I have sort of been pivoting to really talking about getting through the summer and not feeling good, right? Getting through the summer and feeling good. If you're a staff member, if you are a camper, not feeling burned out, which is another one of my kind of pet peeve phrases. I feel like anyone could say they're burned out, right? So what does that mean? And how do you do it and pace yourself? So it's a little bit about pacing yourself, certainly as a staff. When I do staff trainings, it's how to enjoy it and pace yourself. And by the way, you're going to have really hard moments. That's part of it. When I do training, sometimes I go in and ask the returning staff to stand up and raise their hands if they've ever broken down and cried during camp. And inevitably, it's between 99 and 100% who raise their hands. And guess what? They're back for more. So how can we all see the greatness in this job? And I think that's part of staff recruitment. It's part of it starts in the interview process or even before, asking questions like, what makes you overwhelmed? How do you do in these situations? How do you do multitasking? What kinds of things might you feel if you are having 5 different events going on that you have to pay attention to? How can you sort of triage those? It gets people thinking, well, if I'm going to have to do that, this is not for me. That's a good thing, right? Or saying, you know what, I let me think about that, and I can kind of tell you. So just a little bit of really trying not to take every body that breathes as a staff member. And I know that's hard for people who are short staffed, but there it is so much better to have a great group of staff where people are covering a little bit than to be well staffed, so to speak, with 50% of people who are just useless, right? So I think that's important. And mental health goes in with that. It's all about how to get through. It's not about what's your mental health diagnosis or what meds are you on. It's not at all about that. It's about, can you hack it? And by the way, can you hack it while having a great time and creating a great experience for kids? Or if you're a kid, having that experience and being upfront, like you said, Kelly, about who you are as a camp. And it's okay if we're not the camp for you, but I'm going to give you all this information up front and be really honest. And then you're going to be able to tell me, you know what, Kelly, is there another camp nearby where maybe it's not as noisy? Or maybe it's not as rah-rah, it's a little bit more, we're sitting in small groups. And you probably can tell them where to go. So I think all that is really important, in honesty and painting the true picture of camp. It is time that everyone did that. Let's not sugarcoat and say when they get here, they'll figure it out, because they don't. They just will leave.
And that's scary. I think that's really scary, especially if you're probably a new director or new leadership team person, it's scary because I think you think about, I don't want to lose kids, or I don't want families to not think we're great. But yeah, I think like what you said, it pays dividends down the road if you're able to really be clear and to know thyself, right? To know their camp, know yourself. You talked about making it through the summer. And one thing in your article you mentioned as well, along with that, is like remembering the why. So is that one of your big takeaways from that survey, is helping camp directors to remember their why along to help make it through the summer and keep their sanity? Do you have any like insight or takeaways from that piece?
Yeah, I think that camp is the most important thing for kids, bar none. Obviously, that's why I'm in this business, and I've always felt that way. But I feel like with everything that happens in the world and with every passing year, when I think it can't become more important, it does. And so how do you, as a director or owner, look at situation where there are a lot of moving parts and you are exhausted and you have so much on your plate, and yet also balance that with you are providing this incredible space for kids, no matter where they're coming from or who they are. They are, for the most part, away from screens, right? They're away from social media. They are making face-to-face connections. They're making friends for life. They're learning how to be independent. They're learning how to make decisions away from their family, be it during the day or overnight. There are so many advantages. Obviously, I'm preaching to the choir here, but I think it is really important to keep that in mind, because for all of the sort of things you think about are piling up as a director that you have to deal with, and then you think about the impact you're making, or you get a note from a parent saying you really changed my child's life. Those are the moments you have to really, really connect with. And I think directors connecting with one another or getting help connecting, that's why I started doing coaching, connecting to feel like you can be heard and you can vent and you can say, I don't know what to do about this. And somebody can help you, whether it be a friend or another director or a coach, is huge, and use that help, but that's also going to make you remember why you're doing this.
Yeah, and I think that we're all feeling a lot of pressure to deliver on everything that we promise and everything that the website says, and so many of us are putting all these great systems and things in place, and sometimes we're hardest on ourselves as camp directors for sure. And I like your comment about the letter or the email or the interaction with a parent or a staff member. That often reminds us that yes, the job is more demanding than ever, but those moments really make it all worthwhile. And I think for me, one of the reasons that Kelly and I wanted you to speak to this based on the work that you do, and the work you did in the survey, is that I think we just need that reminder, constantly, because it's getting harder, and we want, we want young people to come in the business, and we want people to keep this going, and I think so many of them are rising to the occasion in such a great way. But you need a lot of hands. You need to set expectations, and finally, you got to remind yourself why you're in this. And thankfully, I think many of us are reminded of that each and every summer. So, Nick, this has been some really great insight, and we thank you so much. And now we're gonna end the episode the way we have been all this season, because we just want to get some insight into Nick Teich, the camp person. So we're gonna ask you some very real camp questions. These are hard-hitting journalistic podcast questions that Kelly and I spent all night thinking of. Kelly, we did. But if you've listened to the show before, these are the things that inquiring minds really want to know. So Nick, first thing that comes to your mind, here we go. What's your favorite camp meal?
Probably tacos.
Tacos, like that. If you could lead any program area at camp, what would it be?
It would be waterfront, because on those hot days you get you get the
All
lake.
day, all day waterfront. Those are the best days, right?
Yep.
So do you like your s'mores burnt or just golden brown? What's your preference?
I would like them golden brown, but depending on the day and the mood, sometimes I don't have the patience.
And your attention.
Yeah.
Thinking back to your time as a camper, were you on the homesick side or were you like, hey, peace out, parents. See you when I see you? What were you?
I got on a plane my first day and I don't even remember saying goodbye to my parents. I was starting to ask all my questions to their second year camper. So
How far was that flight? I'm curious. Where was
it
it
was
from?
it was a tiny flight. It was New York to Boston, and then we took a bus from Boston to Maine. So maybe 30
Nice.
minutes.
How old were you?
10.
Nice, nice, nice. As a camp pro, did you lean towards as a daily camp director, did you lean to being on the phone daily, or were you more leaning to I'm in the action daily? Where did you lie in that management piece?
I would say a bit of a mix, but I always wanted to get out more than I was able to. And that is just every camp director's issue, right? I'm gonna get
For
out more
sure.
this year. I'm gonna be with the kids.
I know.
Yeah, keep
Yeah.
trying. It's worth
Yeah.
it.
It's why Kelly and I keep a stock of costumes right beside our computer. So at any given time, we just, right, Cal? We just
Yeah.
look at the costume and we just jump into action.
I always have to have a new character, a new bit every year. I'm working on
I
mine
like
for this
that.
year. You never know. Good mustache and a costume. Awesome, Nick. Thank you. All right. So if people would like to get a hold of you, what is the best way to get a hold of you that we can put in our show notes, Nick?
Sure. You can email me at nick at fairwindsconsult.com or just go to consultforcamp.com. So consultforcamp.com. And I actually have we were talking about year-round positions, and I wrote a blog post not too long ago about that. So maybe we can throw that in the show notes.
We're also going to put the show notes of the Camping Magazine article too, so people can have access to that. So we're going to make all of that stuff available for sure.
That would be amazing. Howie, how can your adoring fans get a hold of you?
Oh my gosh. My family's going to love that one. I'm going to go ripped on. You can reach me at howie@camprobinhood.ca. Love to hear from people. Love to talk camp any time of year.
All right. And my email is Kelly with a Y at hiddenpinesranch.com. Thank you to our sponsors again, Camp Brain and Captivities. We appreciate you so very much. Please don't forget that you can find these show notes at gocamp.pro/ownerspod. You can find the resources that we mentioned that we'll put in there from Nick, which is very generous of you, and all the good stuff from our show and all the other Go Camp Pro podcasts. We hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for listening. Nick, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Yeah.
Always a treat and one of my favorite parts of the month. Nice to see you. And thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks for tuning in to the Camp Owners Podcast. If you like what you heard, please leave us a review on Apple Music or wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, you can find our show notes at gocamp.pro/ownerspod. The Camp Owners Podcast is part of the Go Camp Pro Podcast Network. Find a podcast for camp pros of every age and stage at gocamp.pro/podcast. Hey, Camp Pros. We love that our industry is built on sharing. In order to foster that spirit, if you've gotten even one good idea from a Go Camp Pro podcast, a masterclass, from the Summer Camp Pros group on Facebook, at a conference, or wherever else, we ask that you give credit where credit is due. That way, we can encourage camp pros to keep freely sharing their brilliant ideas and make the camp industry better. Thanks very much.